Yes, I figured I'd do a quick rant on something. I talk a lot about historical grounding, and one of the problems we're suffering from in the greater society is the loss of historical grounding. And you might say, Mark, that's a navigating patterns video, not a video for your crazy rant channel with the bad lighting and the bad sound. And normally I would agree with you. However, um, what occurred to me was I was looking at this video earlier where this guy's doing an emulation of a CPU in C++, the 6502, and I was like, oh, I love emulation and CPUs and operating systems and all that stuff. So I said, oh, it's cool. I'm going to check this out. It's a horrible video. It's freaking horrible. Then I just noticed that it's got unit testing. And I said, unit testing. Unit testing is a problem. Why? Why is unit testing a problem? Well, let's examine what unit testing results in. So I've worked for a lot of companies, a lot of software engineering teams, all doing unit testing and test coverage. And they measure test coverage is measured in relation to unit testing in particular. Now, just so you know where I stand, I hate unit testing. Okay? Unit testing is totally misused. Nobody understands how it works. This thing has been updating, let's see, 10 apps a day on average for 2 months. I have 100 apps, maybe 120 apps on the phone. 10 a day for 2 months on average. So not every day, but some days 30, some days 0, some days 20, some days 10. For 2 months, every day. It's insane. It's absolutely off the hook insane. I don't know why. I don't know what they're changing. I can't find any changes. It doesn't work any differently. It doesn't work. It's getting less stable. That's for sure. But that's what happens when you have a high change rate. I think this is due to things like unit testing, because unit testing is a perfect example of loss of historical grounding in computers. If you have historical grounding is where did the stuff you're doing come from? What's the significance of what you're doing? Why is it there? So we can ask this about unit testing. Here's the history of unit testing from being there, from my memory. Okay, this isn't some like looked it up online and research. I was there. I watched this unfold in time. I was young, whatever. You had C++. C++ is a mess and a catastrophe and a disaster. Should never have been. You want object-oriented C? Do Objective-C. Objective-C is brilliant and easy and whatever. If you like OO, I hate OO, whatever. Objective-C is still your best answer. No, I don't code in Objective-C. Yes, I have a Next computer, a Color Next, with the color board and a color monitor. I know a little bit about this. Next is still my favorite. I had Next at work on one of my machines at one point. Wonderful stuff. Interface Builder is the best thing that's ever been developed, as far as I can tell. Absolute best. When you code in C++, you have public functions and private functions. When you're on a team of developers, let's suppose you got 20 or 30 guys, in the early days, the very good coders were remote back in the day. And somebody's a friend of family's, very bright guy, super smart. He told me this story once about he had his little company. He was working with somebody. They were doing their thing, and they're coding away. And he wasted, I think it was a month or 2 months or something ridiculous, because the guy told him, "Oh no, the private function returns the correct answer." Of course, it didn't. So he couldn't figure out what his bug was. It wasn't his bug, but he didn't have access to the code. Now, this is important. He didn't have access to the code. This is in the early days of version control. Not saying they didn't have version control, but distributed version control wasn't a thing. Storage was expensive. Networks were slow. This all matters. This all matters. So, to avoid such errors, you wanted people to deliver a unit test suite along with their code. That way, you could run the unit test suite and know that the person told you about the return codes of the function, the private function that they wrote, were correct. This makes total sense in an environment where networks are slow, version control works a lot differently and is used a lot differently from how it is today, and it's too expensive or difficult or whatever to have access to all the code. Okay? Those situations don't exist anymore, by the way. Here's the real problem with unit testing. 4 times as much code, automatically, right off the bat. You're writing 4 times as much code, okay? And the bottom line is, if you're gonna have bugs, they're gonna show up, okay? The question is, where are you catching them? Now, if you try, and people do, to say, oh, unit tests catch developer errors, which is technically correct, they will catch developer errors. I would argue that if your developers are making errors that get caught by unit tests and they are not catching them in their personal testing, you should fire them immediately. They are not good enough to be coding, okay? This is like the person that can't fold a letter to put it in an envelope. You can't have them do that job if they can't do that job. It's that simple. I'm not saying these errors don't happen. I'm not even saying they're not common. I'm saying they take 2 seconds to find and they take 2 seconds to fix. There's no reason to spend 4 times as long writing unit test code to find these things automatically when all that means is your developer's not actually looking at the code anymore to find the errors. And here's where the real problem comes in, aside from covering up incompetent developers, which unit testing certainly does, right? The problem that it creates is now you're measuring testing based on unit tests. Unit tests will never catch integration errors. They will never catch functional errors, and they will never catch errors in running code ever. Impossible. And they don't prevent them. Okay? So the problem is, while you may prevent or may lower the total number of errors that get past everything, but by the way, that means you have a bad development process, because you should find things that unit tests would find way before they get that far up the chain. This should happen in the development testing that the developer's doing on their personal box. And again, if that doesn't happen, fire the developer. No, really, actually, because they're not good enough to develop code, right? Get a real developer who's not that bad, right? It's much easier because then all the other errors, right, that are bound to be made by people who are that bad at coding will not appear, okay? So it will reduce your error rate by quite a bit by not doing unit testing and instead firing developers that routinely create what would be called unit tests or unit test errors. Do all your testing upstream and do your test coverage results upstream in the integration testing area at the very least, where it matters. Because at the end of the day, and I've seen this, dozens of companies, dozens, oh, it passes all the unit tests. It doesn't work. The software doesn't function. Yes, it 100%. I've seen 100% test coverage. I've seen it. I verified it myself. It's rare. I've seen it. 100% unit test coverage. Software doesn't work. Does not work. Does not work at all. No functionality. 100% unit coverage test. It's fine, but it doesn't work. What good is this? It's no good. Why? Because they're using unit tests inappropriately. And in an environment where you don't need them anymore. You don't need unit tests. They're completely non-functional with modern development techniques. You do need integration testing because almost no companies do integration testing anymore. I've been to a bunch of companies, they never do it. They never do it. Their QA process is terrible. They pass the unit tests, they do a little bit of UI work, and they ship the thing out, and then it doesn't work. Don't believe me? Talked about this before. Jonathan Blow did a talk about the end of civilization or something. I forget. And I think he's done a couple of these talks. Basically, he says, start looking at your devices, your thermostats, not just your computers, your phones, your car. Notice all the bugs. Software bugs are increasing at a ridiculous rate. I have 0 electronic things that don't have bugs now. 0. 10 years ago, it was less than 20% of my devices had bugs. Now, granted, I hand tune my stuff and, fix bugs for a living. It's easy for me to get to 0 bugs on a given device, or at least it used to be. Now it's forget about it. I don't even try. It's not worth my time to even think about it. There's too many bugs in too many things all over the place. And that's just increasing because we're relying on things like unit tests. And if you look at the software reports, everybody's reporting their software is more stable. But my usage says it's not. Just observation. This is because we didn't look at the history of unit tests and understand that we don't need them anymore. And that doing them removes important information from the world, like whether or not your developer's any good at all. Should they even be working for you in the field? Maybe they shouldn't be, maybe they're not smart enough to be a software engineer. That can happen. Now, I'm not saying there's no role for them. I think half of the developers that we have out there would make great QA people, especially in an environment where no one has any. That would be great. So that's my rant. This is why historical grounding is important. And look, I see this in the broader world. Like, this isn't a computer thing. I'm just giving you a computer example. If you want, sort of a broader overview of some of these things, eventually on Navigating Patterns, my other channel, which got monetized recently, by the way, thanks to a lot of hard work from a lot of people, I'll put something up about historical grounding eventually. I'm going to put it on my list. I don't get through my list very well. We'll see if I can get to it, right? But everything in society is really suffering from this loss of historical grounding. They don't understand where things started, where they came from, why they were there. So they're adopting them without understanding the use case or whether or not they're even valuable. And unit test is a prime example of this. All right, that's my rant. I'll do another one someday. You'll probably look for it. Maybe it'll be good. I suspect all these videos suck. I have no idea. Comments, likes, whatever. It's all there.